Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to the Sweetwater Minute. We are at GearFest 2016. It is a gorgeous day outside. It is day 2, and our special guest is Neal Cappellino. Good to have you here.
Great to be here.
Thanks for taking time to sit down with us and have a little chat.
Absolutely.
You're here on behalf of Rupert Neve Designs and SE Electronics.
That's right, yeah. I've been friends with Jonathan and have a number of pieces in use, and it's easy.
Right.
It's easy to be here on behalf of them.
It's awesome. Yeah, you did 3 workshops here for us over the 2 days, right?
Yeah, we did. We started off, kicked off yesterday with, Adventures in Compression.
Ah.
Seems like a couple days ago. Yeah, Adventures in Compression. We did some nice demos. We split out some multi-tracks and did some hardware-software comparisons, and then went through a number of different types of compression and, just ran it down, and then gave the folks some user tips and practical applications.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. And then what were you working on today?
Oh, man. Oh, how to record anywhere. So this is location-based recording, or turning your home into a recording studio. Whether you're doing live recording, it's just making the most of your environment, how to use Bleed, how to pick your equipment, work with the environment.
Right.
And then we just got off of the panel that was how to get the most out of your sessions. So this was, we presented a kind of a 4-quadrant ecosystem that is musical, technical, interpersonal, and administrative. And we talked about those 4 elements as they relate to the job of, say, a recording engineer.
Right, right.
So
you've had quite a career. Grammy Awards and major artists and all kinds of successful albums and things that you've worked on. So how did you go from being a 3-year-old violin prodigy to being a recording and mixing engineer?
How did that word ever make its way into my description? Yeah, far from prodigy. I started music early with violin and then moved to piano. I'm a creative person at heart, first and foremost, so music's always been a part of my life as a player. Bands, it's a common story. And then growing up and entering college in the 80s, the emphasis was on technology. Everything was hitting with computers. So it was emphasized in my education as well. I went to school as an electrical engineer. Got a bachelor's in electrical engineering, but also a minor in jazz. And so I always kept the music flame alive. Right. I ended up working through college in a co-op program that puts you into industry while you're learning, and I hated it.
Yeah.
I just didn't dig it. I did one stint at IBM in Boca Raton, Florida, and that was really kind of is not for me.
Right.
And I did another data tech firm in Massachusetts. So this was all in the New England area. And so when we matriculated, all my friends had interviewed and got jobs in industry, and I went to work through the suggestion of my jazz instructor at Longview Farm Recording in North Brookfield, Massachusetts, which is since closed, like so many of those great studios have. But that was my launch into the industry, and I had always, I built Heathkit mixers as a kid. I was always the one doing sound for our band,
right.
that sort of thing. So the amalgam of a creative musical person and a technical education is kind of the perfect home for me. Yeah.
So you had studied jazz, but there wasn't really a recording component to what you were studying?
Not at all.
So when you started at studio then, were you learning from the ground up? Were you like an intern, or were you being mentored, or how did you learn the actual craft of recording?
Well, my first exposure actually was as a junior in high school, when everybody's going off and doing sports, and I had done sports too. I found a studio in my hometown, Rochester, New York, that was giving recording lessons. So I went and took courses after school, and that was the beginning of it.
Okay.
The first song I ever recorded was Painted Black, cover band.
Sure.
That was our project at the end of the training, and that was it. I was kind of bitten by the bug, and that just continued from there. But no, the music in college was all performance and history and theory. And then Longview Farm was the jumping off point. That's kind of cut my teeth there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, right. So how do you feel having that strong music background with theory, being able to read, I assume, and play jazz and performance and all that? How do you think that impacts your engineering and production skills?
Oh man, it's invaluable. There's a lot of people that can do what I do technically better equally or better. To me, I think what makes me me is my background, what I bring to the table beyond that. I mean, I think so. There's a given. You have to be proficient with the technology.
Right.
And we can do that. Beyond that, I love being able to follow along, whether it's a string score or a Nashville number chart. I love having had the ear training to have relative pitch and know what people are doing when they're arranging background vocals or something like that. And it just gives you a shorthand. It gives you another link to be with the artist, to be in the mode with them, and you know, another form of communication. Music is communication. If we have the foundation of that communication in theory, the rudiments, the fundamentals, then it just gives you another dimension to what you offer.
Right.
As a part, you know, including who you are as a person. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So at what point did you decide, okay, I'm now an engineer and I've launched my career and started taking on projects of your own?
Well, I think I've had a pretty untraditional arc to my career in relation to Nashville per se, which is where I've been since 1992. So
what brought you to Nashville? Let me ask you that first.
Yeah, I came through Nashville on a trip around the country with my girlfriend at that point. We just took a year off and hopped in a van and traveled, and had a friend in Nashville who was playing bass in a band, and visited with him. Went back up to Rochester, New York, which is my hometown. I was working at Whirlwind Audio, and reconing subwoofer speakers for nightclubs.
Right.
And you know, there was a guy there that was working named Ethan, who said, "Man, Nashville is hot. Nashville is hot right now." And this was '91, and that's when I went back to visit my friend. I said, "You know, I'm looking for a move." Spent a couple of weeks on his couch, and then went back and got my stuff. And so really, I came to Nashville as a player.
Okay.
Play keyboards, got in a band, traveled around, did some playing, but also brought with me a modest arsenal of studio stuff. I think I had like a Soundcraft Spirit console at that point, and like a 1/2-inch 8-track on Atari, and some other stuff. And so I was kind of riding both of those horses. I was playing as a musician and kind of setting up shop wherever I could with the studio stuff. And then I built a studio. Whereas the more traditional thing is to get a job as an assistant or an intern. I didn't go to school at Full Sail or SAE or at Belmont or whatever. I just kind of landed with an idea, and I found an old warehouse that was about 2,000 square feet, kind of a New York loft, all wood, 14-foot ceilings, gorgeous space.
Yeah, nice.
And I just started building. And I swung the hammer, and I wired the patch bays and the AC and the furnace and HVAC and all that, and it was great. I poured myself into it, and I loved it.
Right.
Learned a lot about acoustics, a lot about staggered stud construction and isolation, that sort of thing. And so, but I didn't learn from anybody. I learned a lot of the things I learned during that time was just by making my own mistakes. I didn't even know you could get an outboard preamp for the first couple of years.
Right.
You know, until somebody said, "Man, don't you have any outboard pre's?" I'm like, I can get some. But my jumping off point, to answer your question, the jumping off point was I had some problems with that building and the ownership, and I had to close the studio in 2000, and I went out on my own as a freelance. And the first job I got was on a Dolly Parton project because I knew Pro Tools. So I was an early adopter of Pro Tools. I got in Pro Tools just before Pro Tools 3 came out. And then the PCI machines hit and Pro Tools 3. And,
right.
Because I had that, I had a job on a Dolly Parton record. And so that was my foot in, and then I started to see how things worked. That was my, I guess you could say, my initiation into the Nashville, or the mainstream industry at that point.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So you were, would you say, a Pro Tools operator? Were you doing editing? What kinds of things were you doing in Pro Tools in those days?
Well, a lot of it. I mean, so they didn't know I could record instruments, you know. I had a 2-inch machine, and I was cutting tape early on. Longview, I was cutting tape back in '86, '87. And so that was not new to me, but I got that job as a Pro Tools op. So there was an engineer. So I wasn't setting mics, I wasn't doing anything. I was just setting up the sessions in Pro Tools, doing all the you know, digital maintenance and running the sessions from Pro Tools, comping, editing, you know, that everything that goes with that, and the engineer was responsible for the sounds, the analog domain. And then, you know, there comes a point where it's like, oh, hey, maybe we can get Neal to do this, and yeah, I know how to mic a guitar.
Right.
Can do that. So that was, and then it just evolved from that point.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So since then, you've worked with a pretty amazing list of artists there in Nashville. Recently, Clint Black, Willie Nelson, Darius Rucker, I saw the Chieftains, Jewel, all kinds of amazing artists there. But two that you've worked with repeatedly and done a lot of great albums with are, number one was Brad Paisley, who's just a phenomenal guitarist. I love his playing.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about working with him and how the different albums come together?
Well, a lot of that work was with Frank Rogers as a producer, and so Frank has his arsenal of engineers, and I was lucky to be a part of that. We were probably as many as 5 engineers at work on the project at any given time. So somebody might be doing a tracking session, somebody's doing overdubs, somebody's doing some editing, somebody's mixing. So I was part of the overdub and editing I started out as, and later on doing more and more. And then more recently, Brad decided to put a home recording facility in his second house on his property, which is pretty much, you could say, is the top end of home recording facilities with, you know, Neve sidecars and the like. So, you know, those sessions with Brad are and have been fascinating to me because he's an interesting animal.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much so. And all the top artists are in their own way. And so his version of that is just always on 11 in terms of momentum, ideas, progress, productivity, get it done, try this. And in order to keep up with that, you have to be ready. You have to match and mirror your artist's energy and tenor. So with that, you know, it's been like very much leaning forward. Everything, and it's probably nowhere else more evident than in his guitar playing. His style of playing is very much leaning forward. It's very fast. It's very, you know, kind of pyrotechnical in some ways. And,
yeah, sure.
And so when we're recording guitar, it's really fascinating to get your mind spinning at that speed. And they have a vision, they have an idea, and they don't want to lose it. And so you have to match that energy and speed. So it's challenging and it's gratifying, but it really gets you on your toes.
Right.
And you know, change directions real quick with a vocal or a song. Want to get back to where we were last week, that sort of thing. So you got to have your housekeeping in order. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So is that the kind of thing then, at the rate that you're working then, where you can, do you have the luxury of trying different microphones, different preamps, different placements, or do you just say this is the way we record guitar because we have to just be ready? You
got to be ready. If you want to try something, put it up and have the normal signal path ready to go. So in a redundancy sort of thing. So if you try something, he might come in and say, this doesn't sound like it usually does, what's wrong? Give me 2 seconds. I'll revert back to what we were doing. Sometimes you can get his attention to say, hey, I've got an idea, because he is creative and sometimes into it. You never know what else is going on in the back of his mind where he's got to get this done. So yeah, sometimes there's room to try stuff, and sometimes he might just say, I'm bored with that. Let's try something different. Give me something different.
Right.
And you know, Brad will talk, as some people do, in ways that he articulates it in a non-technical way, and sometimes in a very amorphous way.
Right.
So you have to kind of interpret that. It's all good. He's
yeah.
You know, he's got a margin for experimentation. You just got to catch him at the right time. Yeah.
Yeah, it's got to be exciting.
It is. It is exciting, and we work long days, a lot of energy, and you know how it is when you're driven, and when you're consumed with something, and you're compelled to do it. And so Brad is somebody who pulls everybody along in that wake, and you got to keep up.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Another artist you've done a number of projects with is Alison Krauss.
Yeah.
Tell us how that compares. Compare and contrast the two, if you will.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's a good comparison. Yeah, a lot of yang and a lot of yin. Alison is just a joy to work with. She's the best person and personality. She is someone that really allows for the creativity from the technical side too, to happen, and she makes allowances for that. Most, you know, like for instance, if you're in a tracking situation, she wants the tones right. Everybody wants the tones right, and if you're, you know, challenged to get something happening, and you say, "Hey, we just need a couple more minutes. I'm working on the bass things." Oh yeah, whatever you need, whatever you need. So that's very cool. It's been a master's level education working with her in terms of pretty much every element of music, whether it's arrangement, song selection, string arrangements, background vocals, comping, listening to performances, making critical creative judgments. I can't tell you how much I learn from her every time we work. And one of the most pronounced things for me is how she listens. And I've talked about this before, but we would sit down on paper airplane record doing vocals and just listening to the tracks that we've recorded and going into a comping situation, and she'll sit and I'll run down the takes and we'll make our notes on the comp sheet, and you know, by and large we'll compare, and by and large I'll be off. You know, and at one point I just had to ask, how are you listening to this? What's driving your judgment here? And she's like, oh, it's just a feeling. It's just a feeling. So it's it's a visceral feeling. And she's interpreting what she's hearing. Is it the story? Is that the emotion I want in that read? Is that too angry? Is that too wimpy? Is whatever it is. And so, you know, you start listening in those ways. And so I started to get closer and closer to how she was doing it. It's, yeah, I can't say enough good things about her, right down to them. And she's one of the last artists that I know of that I've been working with that still takes their time and gives it as much time as it demands, as much time as it needs.
Right.
She's not afraid to stop and say, look, let's call this, let's come back to this. Or she's not afraid to hang out and wait for it, too. So I really appreciate her respect for the craft. And
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So when you're looking at the way that she's listening, tell us how you were listening. Were you listening more for the technical side of things, for things being in tune, out of tune, noise? What was it that was making you choose particular takes? Well,
you know, there's a certain amount of like, is it in tune? But by and large, that has become secondary, especially when you're working with somebody who's in tune
all
most
the time,
of the time. But you know, for me, I listen to a lot of rhythm in vocals and how it pockets in the track. I listen to the expression, but it just wasn't on her level in terms of the emotional interpretation. And you know, you have to not look at music when you're judging it from an emotional standpoint. Right. You can't look at the screen. You just can't. And I've said that over and over again, and I still have to remind myself every time I do it. So those are a couple of things. But I think it was more, you know, she's in the top she's judging the top 1 or 2%. You know, we can be in agreement on largely in agreement, but the nuance is where she's coming from. And then she has a picture for the song that she's looking for the right read for the picture for the song. So, and she's said this before, she can't sing something unless it's true to her. So unless this has some semblance or resonance for her in her life, even though we're creating, you know, a mythology or a story that may be fictional, it's got to be true to her in some way. So she's pulling from that context, and it's a matter of me moving over and getting in tune with that. Right. Yeah.
Right. Right. Very interesting. Very interesting. So are you doing most of these projects in your own studio, or are you using commercial facilities?
Both. Both. The studio that I work out of in Nashville is kind of a home base for me and for her. We do all of our work there in the overdub mode, some mixing, and tracking happens elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah. Because you've got a very well equipped studio.
Yeah. Yeah. It gets the job done.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't see where it would.
Yeah.
Trident console,
Yeah.
ATC monitors, universal audio gear, lots of awesome microphones and things. So you've got a nice rig.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
We're not wanting.
So when I look at your credits, there's a lot of engineering credits, a lot of mixing credits. What is the difference for you philosophically, engineering versus mixing? How do you approach those two things differently?
Well, I guess I'm always thinking about the mix when I'm engineering.
Mm-hmm.
You as much as possible want it to be a finished product. You might not apply the compression that in tracking or recording that you would in mixing. Why? How do I think of those? That's an interesting question. A tracking situation. There's a catalyst for creation there. It's a cauldron. It's things are going to come out the way they come out. Sometimes it's messy. Sometimes it's neat and clean. Whatever.
Right.
It's a process that has to unfold in the way that it's going to unfold.
Right.
And hopefully, like Alison, she understands that and allows that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes with somebody like Brad, it's get in there and make it happen. So recording situations change so much. You're matching a room with the project. You want the right size room. You want the right character of the room for the artist or the band. You want the right accoutrements. You want the right ISO. So you're trying to, and you're putting that all together, and you're looking for a sum that's greater than the parts. All the myself included, the musicians, the artists. Mixing can be a relatively solitary thing. Mixing has changed. I do largely in the box now. I use outboard summing amp, or actually an analog summing box.
Mm-hmm.
But by and large, you need the flexibility. You know the story there. And that's a relatively solitary process until you get down to the last, 10 or 15% where you might call the clients in for review and tweaks and prints in the studio. And I miss that. I miss the interaction of mixing for someone.
Right.
I miss the collective agreement of people in a room that get excited about something, and that's it. You print it. We've agreed upon it, and it lives. I mean, that's what we fight in demoitis.
Right.
Whether it's a rough mix from tracking or a demo, there is a collective agreement to that. So I think I miss that part of mixing, where you just don't have attended mixing sessions anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right, right. Does it give you a little more freedom to try things, though, and to not worry so much about it because there's no one looking over your shoulder?
Yes and no. I mean, I think it gives me the freedom to try things, but the impetus to try things, I like impressing people when they're in the room. I like somebody over my shoulder saying, "Hey, mess that up," or try something. We had this on the demo, so I miss that interaction. People commenting on the mix always makes my mixes better. And I find that I can get it 95% of the way there, or 99% of the way there, but the devil's in the details too. It really gets it over the finish line when you have somebody else's input, and I like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, right, very cool. So as we mentioned and discussed briefly at the beginning of our interview here, Rupert and Neve Designs and SC Electronics were kind enough to bring you in and to sponsor the workshops and things that you're doing here for GearFest. Tell us a little bit about your association with those two companies. Why don't we start with R&D and tell us how you made, what do you like about that company and their gear?
Well, Transformers, Rupert.
Right.
I like that they've gotten back to Rupert's designs.
Mm-hmm.
Josh and Jonathan are friends, colleagues. Relationships are important, but the gear has to speak to me. It has to be in use. I've got to put an honest endorsement behind something, and I use the gear.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of as simple as that, and good people behind it. The 5052 pre has been a go-to pre since I got that. The 5059 satellite summing box has been great. In terms of, there's a couple other pieces that I have. There's a couple that I'd like to have.
Right.
But it stems from, the jumping off point for that relationship is the gear and putting it into use. So, It's kind of it. It's
Right.
got to
Right.
have that.
I've seen some pictures lately, saw some pictures lately, where you were using some of the, I think it was the RN17
Yeah.
Neve design microphone to mic up acoustic guitar.
Yeah.
And so tell us about your association with those microphones and how you're using some of those things.
Small diaphragm condensers have, stringed instruments, acoustic guitar, even piano, fiddle, whatever it is. That's been a real go-to because it's a transformer. It's transformered small diaphragm condenser. I mean, it's
Right.
great. One of the hardest things to do is balance mid-range in stringed instruments, especially when you have a lot of mid-range instruments like bluegrass music, which I do a fair amount of.
Mm-hmm.
Those things just help in the mid-range. It's a tone. It's a kind of a plug-and-chug tone. So a lot of times I'll use an XY pattern out in front of a guitar, about a foot out in front of the guitar. And then something that I picked up from Brad one time, we were recording acoustic, and I had a space pair on his acoustic, and then he was cutting a vocal, and we had a 563 on his vocal, and it had fallen down. It was just pointing to the waist of the guitar, kind of right there, and he strummed the chord, and it sounded dynamite, and he had it in the headphones. He's like, don't change a thing. So a spin-off of that for me has been the XY with the waist, or a space pair with a guitar or a microphone pointing at the waist of the guitar.
Interesting.
So that has been like the RN17s and a VR2,
Mm-hmm.
and I like the active ribbon on that in that position.
Right.
So that's,
Very cool stuff.
and you've got options. It collapses to mono well.
Mm-hmm.
If you're phase coherent, you can spread it out if you need. It's cool.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You mentioned, the issue with so many instruments and vocals and everything all live kind of in that mid-range area.
Yeah.
How do you approach a mix? Do you build from the drums up? Do you start with a lead vocal? Where do you begin, and how do you build up?
Well, if I'm getting tracks from someone, a lot of times I'll tell them, sometimes the tracks will come flattened, faders at 0 and nothing. Sometimes I'll be taking a handoff from them, and the first thing I'll do is listen to where their session's at. There might be some plugins missing or whatever, but I'll listen to that, try and get a feel for the song.
Mm-hmm.
Then, if the former situation is the case, then I just start putting things into balance with faders and pans.
Mm-hmm.
I want to find out where things live. So I'm not soloing yet. I'm not listening to individual instruments unless I'm hearing a problem that I need to go after early. Just finding balances. And I try and find a static mix. Where do these things cooperate and behave and talk to each other in those fader and pan positions, where I have to do the least amount of riding? That's usually what I try to do, is find that quiescent level for everything. And panning, panning's like, it's tricky sometimes. You got a lot of those mid-range instruments, but those decisions are largely made by what the conversations are instrumentally. Especially in bluegrass, I've learned so much from bluegrass music about arrangement, and a lot of it has to do with those conversations, the handoffs between vocals and instruments, or instruments and instruments. Those conversations inform my panning positions, and so once I find that static balance, then I work from there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing your wisdom with us.
Hey, it's my pleasure.
And the journey that you've been on to achieve all your success. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
We wish you much more, of course.
Thank
And we hope you come back.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Come
I'd
back
love
to
to be back.
GearFest and hang out with us some more.
You know it.
It'd be awesome.
Cool.
Thanks, Neal.
All right, Mitch.
Great to see you.
You too.
I'm Mitch Gallagher. Thanks for joining me for the Sweetwater Minute.